Do the Philadelphia Eagles have a culture problem? Is Jalen Hurts regressing? Do the Eagles have problems with weapons outside of A.J. Brown, DeVonta Smith, and Dallas Goedert? All that and more on a crazy Wednesday edition of the Locked On Eagles podcast.
You are Locked On Eagles, your daily Philadelphia Eagles podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Today's episode of the Locked On Eagles podcast is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, use our promo code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. Thank you so much for making Locked On Eagles your first listen each and every day right here on the Locked On Podcast Network. I'm Louis DiBiase, riding solo for the day. Gino Camilleri is off, but he'll be back tomorrow for Crossover Thursday with Patricia Traina of Locked On Giants, Eagles Giants. This coming Monday, a Christmas Day bout at 4:30. The Eagles trying to stop the bleeding. They are gushing blood right now. It's a 3-game losing streak, blown out by the 49ers, blown out by the Dallas Cowboys, collapsing on Monday night in a game you should have had against an inferior opponent with a backup quarterback that you're leading the entire game in Seattle. You lose that one like you always do when you play the Seahawks, and suddenly the Eagles are back to second place in the NFC East. They're the 5 seed, and the vibes are just a mess. Even though with everything I just laid out, this team is 10-4. They have the easiest remaining schedule in the NFL. You go Giants, Cardinals, Giants to end the year. If you win out and Dallas wins out, the tiebreaker is strength of victory, which Philadelphia would have. So the division title is still in sight. The 2 seed is still in sight. Technically, you could win the 1 seed still if, San Francisco lost to the Baltimore Ravens, and if they dropped another game. I can't really imagine that, but the 2 seed is still in play. The division, like this team, everything still they want to do this year is in front of them. They could still win a Super Bowl and run the table, but the fact of the matter is right now, let's call a spade a spade. These past few weeks have been a nightmare, and Gino and I have tried to contextualize things and not panic and give this team the benefit of the doubt, because in the Nick Sirianni, Jalen Hurts era, they've overcome 2021 starting 2-5 and, winning 7 of their last 9 to make the playoffs. And then in 2022, they started off, or I shouldn't say they started off slow. They were the hottest team in football for months. But then they had a little bit of an off streak there with the Washington loss and the kind of shaky win against Indianapolis. And they shook that off really quick. And this year, they're 10-1 through 11 games, overcoming a lot of adversity, injuries, slow starts, leading comebacks against really good football teams like the Dolphins, the Cowboys, the Bills, the Chiefs. Again, we trusted this team. We trusted this locker room and the veterans and the young players we said were so mature. And then you look at these 3 games, and especially this past week, and they are just so uncharacteristically rattled with the comments. Like, the vibes in Philadelphia are terrible. Again, as I mentioned, like Gino and I, after the first 2 losses to San Francisco and Dallas, we were trying to not panic and, as I said, give them the benefit of the doubt. But I'm running out of patience. Like, I'm very disappointed with this team right now. Not even just talking about like the play on the field, not the fact that they've lost 3 games straight and they've blown this opportunity that they've had, and they had no business losing that game to Seattle. But it's the way they're composing themselves right now. It's the way they're talking to the media and the public and how things are getting out anonymously in these stories from the media. It feels like it's 2018 to 2020 all over again. So the question is, do the Philadelphia Eagles have a culture problem? I don't think so. But right now, their culture, their locker room does not look like this buttoned up, unified core with mature veterans that have been through all of this before, mature beyond their years, young players like Jalen Hurts, DeVonta Smith, A.J. Brown, Dallas Goedert, the list goes on, Jordan Davis and Jalen Carter, all the guys from Georgia and Alabama. I thought the days of anonymous quotes from, I think it was Alshon Jeffrey, or the snakes like Orlando Scandrick that are in this locker room, and just the rift between coaches and front office members, all of that just turmoil and this toxic environment. I thought we were beyond that. I did not think that this core would ever have to deal with that. They just seemed so buttoned up, even in press conferences. Like, yes, it doesn't really give we, the media, fun things to talk about, But I almost loved the fact that Jalen Hurts was boring in his press conferences, and they just didn't let a lot of things outside of the locker room. And just, again, they were so collected. And then this week, it's like it's back to what it was, again, 2018 to 2020, where anytime things go wrong with the Philadelphia Eagles for, a month plus, they just unravel and get sloppy publicly. Like, the way they're dealing with things is just not okay. Look at all of the comments. And, that report from ESPN this week about the Eagles having a finger-pointing problem, now I completely believe that, because while a lot of the things these players are saying might be true, like that anonymous source saying that the Eagles' offense is way too predictable, it's way too vanilla. That's what somebody said to Derek Gunn. While that may be true, while Brandon Graham's comments about the media maybe getting to the coaching staff, and that's why Sean Desai got fired as defensive coordinator, while that may be true, while Darius Slay's comments about being good against the Cowboys, he didn't have a bad game. While that may be true, while Jalen Hurts saying that there's a commitment issue right now with this team, this all can be correct. A.J. Brown even saying, he kind of took a subtle jab at the coaches, like, the receivers, like, all I can do is my job. We're still catching the football. We're still getting open. All of this can be correct. But for the Eagles to handle this the way they are is very surprising, disappointing, where they're doing this now publicly, creating these distractions. It's causing more of a rift to me, more of a negative light on this team. It's adding more pressure because now the media is asking coaches and players about all these comments, and it's just, to me, not helping when you go public with this, when you go to these press conferences and, you make comments like that and, you finger point. I think there is an accountability problem right now. There's almost an arrogance problem with the Eagles where Darius Slay is saying, well, it wasn't my fault that we lost to Dallas. And A.J. Brown saying, well, it wasn't on me. And Brandon Graham saying, well, the coaches, they only fired Sean Desai because the media got to them. Jalen Hurts, after having one of the worst performances I've seen in a long time from a quarterback in Philadelphia against Seattle, even with the illness, just was awful. That interception targeting Quez Watkins cost them the game. Going to the podium and saying that there's a commitment issue around this team, like, I hate the way they're handling things. I hate that they're handling it publicly. It looks bad. I just don't think there's any positives to it. Like, if you have these issues, deal with it in-house. Deal with the locker room. I mean, that's just, I don't know. That's where I'm at with it. Again, it doesn't help me. This is a juicy thing to talk about. But for the Eagles, it's like the players, you're adding fuel to the fire. And I thought this team knew better than that. Like, I thought Brandon Graham would know better than that, considering he was there with the Doug Peterson era when all of this kind of stuff was going on. So was Fletcher Cox. And it's kind of crazy, like, the one consistent variable that I'm thinking, like, why does this keep happening in Philadelphia? The only guy that I can think of that's consistent here is Howie Roseman, that's been a part of all this, and none of this leads back to Howie. So it's just, it's very just, I don't know, it shows a lack of accountability, and Nick Sirianni can get fired up all he wants in these press conferences when he's asked over and over again about accountability. But when you preach this kind of stuff so much, when you're Nick Sirianni, and this is something that you talk about all the time, that this is what you believe and this is what your team lives by philosophically, and you hear Jalen Hurts mirror that talk, and again, all these core veterans do too, and then the minute there is adversity for the first time in multiple years, you all just seem like you're completely unraveling. That is not a good look, and it does not give me a lot of faith. Like, yes, in 2018 and 2019, they did overcome a lot of that stuff, the comments being made, and it felt like some sort of rift in the locker room. And looking back now, we know there was a lot of that going on. They were still able to overcome that, join together, and make the playoffs. I still think they can do that now. They've clinched the playoffs. I still think they can go on a run in January. They are that talented. They have that experience. That team has done it before. They've overcome this adversity. But right now, it doesn't look great. And I hate the way that these players are handling it. And it's disappointing because look who the players are. It's Brandon Graham. It's Jalen Hurts. It's Darius Slay. It's, Fletcher Cox saying he's employee number 91, that, hey, I had nothing to do with the coaching change. Like, basically saying what BG said. It's like, I don't agree with it almost. That's what it felt like. Everybody is just, they're pointing fingers. And you can hate Nick Sirianni's comments today in his press conference about defending Quez Watkins and Julio Jones and Brian Johnson, saying it's on him, and you might not believe that. I don't believe a word he said, but at least he's defending his guys. Like, yes, he's not. These other comments might be true, But I'd rather take the approach of Nick Sirianni if I'm thinking of it through a team perspective, not from the media. I don't like the finger pointing publicly. Do that in-house. Do that in the locker room. You do not need to say that to the media. And do not do things anonymously. That bothers me. Like, even back then, those anonymous quotes about Carson Wentz and Howie Roseman, looking back now, they all seem kind of true, at least to a certain degree. I think it was all extreme and, dramatized because it's Philadelphia and everything's drama in the city and it's, under a microscope. But again, if you do something anonymously, I lose respect for whoever that is. And we probably won't ever find out. But I don't know. I don't think the Eagles have a culture problem right now, but it's very shocking and disappointing the lack of composure that this team and their core has shown over the last few weeks. Hopefully they'll turn things around, but it starts with Jalen Hurts. And again, Jalen, I was not happy with those comments that he made, even if he was correct, not after the game he had against Seattle. Let's be honest, Jalen is regressing a little bit right now. Not to a Carson Wentz-like degree from 2020, but he has regressed this year compared to last year, and he is struggling over these last 5 games. I want to get into some Jalen Hurts talk coming up next right here on the Locked On Eagles pod. Today's episode of the Locked On Eagles podcast is brought to you by Game Time. Game Time is the fastest and easiest way to get tickets. You should not have to worry when you're buying tickets to your next big event. It's the fast and easy way, like I said, to buy tickets for sports, for music, comedy, and theater events near you. With killer last-minute deals, all-in prices, views from your seat, and their best price guarantee, Game Time takes the guesswork out of buying tickets. Game Time is the only ticketing app that gives you complete peace of mind with your purchase. See the view from your seat before you buy, so you know exactly what to expect when you arrive. All-in prices show your totals up front, so you know you're getting a great deal without hidden fees. You can buy tickets in seconds with just 2 taps. They're obsessed with finding ways to help you save money on tickets this year. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, use our promo code LOCKEDON for $20 off your first purchase. Terms do apply. Again, create an account, redeem that code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off. Make sure you download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. We thank you so much for making Locked On Eagles your first listen each and every day, guys. Exciting news from the Locked On Podcast Network. We have launched the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube. Locked On Sports Today is here for you 24/7, covering the top sports stories of the day with the local experts of Locked On, plus our national shows covering every league. Go to Locked On Sports Today on YouTube and subscribe to the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel. So, talking about a culture problem, or maybe not a culture problem in segment 1, but just a locker room problem right now in Philadelphia, a lack of accountability issue with these players. I think they're just handling things the wrong way. Again, I don't think this is suddenly an immature team that's turning on each other and they're not as unified as we maybe thought, and maybe we shouldn't give them the benefit of the doubt. I mean, we're losing confidence and they're struggling, and I don't think a lot of these guys are handling things the right way, but I don't think we're nearly at the point of saying, like, upheaval, get rid of this core, get rid of this head coach. Howie Roseman's a problem again. Like, no, I don't think we're there at all. This team is still 10-4. They have everything out in front of them. They have, every time this has happened since we've been doing Locked On Eagles, they've turned it around. 2018, 2019, 2021, any sort of adversity last year they overcame. So I still have to give them the benefit of the doubt, but I have not been happy with the lack of composure this week. And it feels very much like 2018 and 2019. And those years, again, they made the playoffs and they overcame things, but they underperformed for a lot of reasons. And one of them was because I think players just handled adversity sometimes the wrong way. And I think they allowed it to snowball, and this team cannot allow that. They can't afford that, because not every year you're going to have this opportunity where you have this much talent on the roster, old and young, and you're in a conference in a league right now that is completely wide open, and you're 10-4, and you still control your fate basically with this division. You can't take advantage of these windows when you have them. So hopefully they can turn it around, but it's going to start with their quarterback. Jalen Hurts has to be better. And, again, I wasn't happy with the comments he made after the Seattle game about the commitment issues, even if it's true, because Jalen normally is very buttoned up at the podium. So if he's saying something like that, it's probably true. But again, after the game he had, where you have, a 40.1 passer rating, where you have the interception that you had to Quez Watkins, an inexcusable deep ball when you're up 17-13 against a backup quarterback with a little over 8 minutes to go, and it's a gotta have it type of game. Like, to throw that away and then make those comments, I wasn't really happy with it. And Jalen's struggling. Like, let's just be honest. Is he regressing? I guess comparatively speaking to the ceiling of what we saw in 2022, technically, if you look at it through that light, he has regressed all year. He has not been the same player as 2022. And I would say the last 5 games especially, the numbers are not good. Over the last 5 games, he's a 59.6% completion percentage. That's 25th in the league. 988 yards, which is 15th. 4 touchdowns, 4 interceptions. That's 25th in the league when it comes to the ratio. A 76 flat rating. That's also 25th in the league. Like, not good numbers. Again, he had the 3rd lowest passer rating of his career against Seattle at 40.1. He's got 17 turnovers this year. He had 19 combined in 2021 and in 2022. So with all that being said, Jalen has taken a step back. I think he is trying to do too much. He's playing too much hero ball. He's holding on to the football. I think sometimes he's failing to get into a rhythm. He just doesn't seem as confident in the offense this year with Brian Johnson. And again, he's putting the football on the ground, not just with the interceptions, but he's fumbling. I just think he's pressing right now. And I was listening to Sports Radio 94 WIP, and a caller called in and was kind of talking about his frustrations with, feels like after, and I kind of feel this too, an Eagles quarterback after like a historic year, they always regress to these extremes, like Michael Vick from 2010 to 2011, Nick Foles from 2013 to 2014, Carson Wentz from 2017, and then, a gradual decline, 2018, 2019, then the historic regression of 2020. And he kind of said, he was kind of comparing it to Carson Wentz. And I've been seeing that a lot on Twitter. A lot of people are starting to talk about this, and I get it. They're scarred. The last time you paid a quarterback historic money with Carson Wentz, you thought you were going to have that guy for a decade plus, right? In 2019, he carries a team with no good receivers. Again, no one had over 500 receiving yards that year at that position. He carries them to the playoffs, and then in 2020, it looks like he forgot how to play football. Even though he wasn't the 2017 version of himself in 2018 and 2019, Carson Wentz was still a pretty damn good quarterback in those 2 seasons, right? A 20-plus touchdown season and a 7 or under interception year. It was always solid, and then he just historically regressed. So I get the PTSD and the nervousness when you see a guy like Jalen struggle and not be the same as last year. But I do want to put things in perspective. The level of regression Jalen's had this year, it's nowhere near Carson Wentz in 2020. Jalen Hurts this year, 4 weeks ago from FanDuel, was tied with Dak Prescott as the betting favorite to win MVP. They were 10-1 this year. He has led many comebacks where they're trailing by double digits in the second half. His numbers, he's still on pace to surpass 4,000 yards from scrimmage. He has 14 rushing touchdowns. He's been on a 30-plus passing touchdown pace for most of the year. Now it's probably closer to that 25 to 28 range. And so his completion percentage is still good. It's at a 66. Jalen's been still an elite quarterback this year. I will say, though, one thing that it does line up with Carson is a lot of the issues are the same. And we need to make sure the Eagles get ahead of this earlier than they did with Carson, right? Because I think what you saw with Wentz, and again, you got to remember with Carson, it was complicated, right? There was his injuries to the roster, a lack of weapons, bad coaching, his own stubbornness and bad habits, a loss of confidence after the Foles Hurts stuff. So again, a very unique circumstance, but I will say some of the problems are kind of similar. The pressing, the hero ball, the slow increase in turnovers, I think some of that is similar, and they need to make sure that they don't let it spiral like it did with Carson, and it enhances or creates these bad habits. Because when you look at with Wentz, he was naturally always a reckless player. I don't want to even use the word reckless a lot, but he was always an aggressive player that took things into his own hands and liked to play outside of structure. And then when the Eagles failed year after year to build a solid support system around him with receivers and, young and older players that were both good on both sides of the football. And then when they lost, John DeFilippo and Frank Wright, he just did not have the right coaching staff around him. Those issues, the lack of support, kind of like Jalen right now with Brian Johnson, and I think an up and down team, it created or enhanced for Wentz these bad habits of always feeling the need to play hero ball. And again, he just spiraled out of control and he was just never the same player. Jalen is wired completely different. I trust that he will not regress to that historic level, but you want to make sure, like, if Brian Johnson's not the guy, you don't wait multiple years like the Eagles did with Mike Groh and with Press Taylor. You cannot afford to lose to ruin, I should say, another franchise quarterback. Carson Wentz deserves a lot of the blame for what happened in Philadelphia, but I think the Eagles ruined him to a degree. Like, Howie Roseman played a huge part in ruining that guy. So did Doug Peterson, so did the coaches, so did the lack of players on his offense. And so with Hurts, yeah, like, no, he's still an elite player. I think it's more similar to like what you've been seeing with Josh Allen the last year and a half, where he's still an elite player that makes elite plays, just like Jalen Hurts this year. Like, they still do that consistently week in and week out. They're one of the most dynamic players in football. But again, that need to play, to create, to carry, and to play hero ball, it continues to create an increased turnover problem more and more. And it's more like that. It's very similar to what happened with Jalen Hurts in Buffalo. And the Bills said, like, we can't afford to lose this guy, to ruin this guy. So what do? They fired Ken Dorsey. They hired Joe Brady as their offensive coordinator. And now the Bills are the hottest team in football. They're putting up 30-plus points every single week. So for me, it's like the Eagles need to see that and say, we need to protect our asset, this massive historic investment we made in Jalen Hurts, and not like learn from our mistakes with Carson, learn from the mistakes of other teams in the NFL, and get this kid back to where he was, you know, just a month ago, but also where he was in 2022, because he can get back to that level of player. So are the comparisons to Wentz fair? Yes and no. Like, no, he is not regressing to that historic level. Jalen has still been elite for the majority of the 2023 season. He was an MVP candidate all year long, and he can still get back to that player when he's healthy, when he's not sick, when he's not as rattled. But I will say some of the problems that he's starting to develop, that's what happened with Carson. That's what happened with Josh Allen. They need to get that right. He needs to get that right, though, too. Like, that Quez play, that's just inexcusable on his part. He should know better, though, too. You know, you can lead a horse to water, like with Carson Wentz, but you can't force him to drink. Jalen, again, he has a track record of being a safe, mature player, so I want to give him the benefit of the doubt, but there's a lot of plays this year that were his fault, too, and that's why I didn't really love the timing of the comments he made after that press conference with the Seattle Seahawks loss. So overall, it's interesting to see. Like, again, I can understand where people are going with this conversation, but let's pump the brakes a little bit on the Carson stuff. You can see you can kind of see where it all developed, and you're nervous to go back down that road. But I think this is more like a Josh Allen thing where Jalen's going to be an elite player making elite plays. Like, you got to remember, too, Carson got injured, so he wasn't able to do a lot of the same things that he could in 2017. He could get away with being reckless a lot. With Jalen, I think he has all that talent still, so he's always going to be that guy. But the turnovers are a problem, and he needs to nip that in the butt right away. The thing is, though, weapons are not really making it easy on him outside of the big three of DeVonta Smith, A.J. Brown, and Dallas Goedert. I think they have an issue behind those guys. I want to get into that coming up next right here on Locked On Eagles. Today's episode of the Locked On Eagles podcast is brought to you by Prize Picks Daily Fantasy. It's the most fun I've had, winning 25 times my money this football season. All you got to do in Prize Picks, select 2 or more players, pick more or less than their projected stats, and place your entry. With the basketball season here, which I love basketball, you can now pick combo projections too across football and basketball from their specials league. This is awesome. It's a league created specifically for combo projections that includes 2 or more players from different sports or leagues. For example, LeBron James, you can take him. You could take, let's say, A.J. Brown at a 10.5 combo of 3 points made and receptions. That's so cool. Again, I've never seen that in fantasy before. Want to play alongside some of Prize Picks' favorite players, like famous players like rapper Meek Mill, who we love in Philadelphia, comedian Andrew Schultz. You can now find community plays under the promos tab of the app to view entries from some of the biggest names in the Prize Picks community each and every week. Also, Prize Picks, they continue to change the game. They even offer a reboot policy so that your entries stay in play even if one of your players gets injured. So for football and basketball games, if you have a player who exits the game in the first half and does not return in the second, that player is rebooted. Prize Picks is the only daily fantasy sports platform with an injury insurance policy. Go to prizepicks.com/LockedOnNFL. Use our code LockedOnNFL for a first deposit match up to $100. Once again, prizepicks.com/LockedOnNFL. Promo code LockedOnNFL for a first deposit match up to $100. We thank you so much for making Locked On Eagles your first listen each and every day. It's a late night Wednesday edition of the show. And so the Eagles have a problem right now on offense, and I think a lot of it has to do with Brian Johnson and the lack of consistent play calling. Nick Sirianni at the press conference today said that the offense is on him. It's his fault. It's been the same offense for 3 years. Like, don't blame Brian Johnson. It's on me and his game planning. I agree with him. It's on him too, but Brian Johnson doesn't get off either. Like, the play calling has not been good this year for the majority of the time. So I think Nick is right that it's his fault, but he's wrong that it's not Brian's too. It's both of their faults. It's on Jalen Hurts too. He has not played well over the last 5 games. The other problem though, and there were a lot of numbers to support this week, the Eagles, and again, it's not like a massive like deal breaker for this team to be a contender or not when it comes to like weapons beyond DeVonta Smith, Dallas Goedert, and A.J. Brown, because last year, those were the only 3 guys you went to, and then it was Miles Sanders in the ground game. Again, Quez Watkins last year didn't do anything, and, Zach Pascal was a non-factor, and no tight end behind Dallas Goedert did anything either. So it's not like this is something that's different from last year that's costing them games. But it would be really nice if somebody could step up beyond those big 3. The other weapons have been egregious this year. Listen to this. The bottom 4 NFL wide receivers in yards per route run, according to Pro Football Focus, with a minimum of 100 routes run. Number 1 is Julio Jones. Number 3 is funny. It's Jalen Reagor in New England. Just had to throw that in there. Number 4 is Quez Watkins. And then when you look at that same stat at tight end, tied for first are the 2 Eagles tight ends beyond. All 3 of them are in the top 7, but there's 2 of them that are tied for first for the lowest yards per route run with a minimum of 30 routes run, according to PFF. Alberto is number 1. Grant Calcaterra is tied for first with Alberto. Jack Stahl is number 7. They are getting almost nothing after those big 3. And the run game this year, unlike last year when Miles Sanders was cooking all year long, the run game this year, and it's not all DeAndre Swift's fault, but it's been way more up and down than it was last year. So you've almost needed those other passing weapons to step up more with an increased volume of attempts, and they have not been there. I saw another stat listen to this about Quez Watkins. Jalen Hurts is 0 for 6 in his last 6 attempts to Quez Watkins with 2 interceptions and 1 drop. When targeting Quez Watkins 20 or more yards downfield in the last 381 days. Watkins has a minus 1.79 EPA per target on these plays. Quez Watkins was a guy I defended for multiple years, from 2020 to 2022, for 3 seasons straight. And I defended him this offseason too. I thought he could bounce back this year. He needs to be cut. The fact that he was on the field in that situation on Monday Night Football is inexcusable. And this year, I'm not saying Howie Roseman needs to go out and spend a first-round pick on receiver or tight end or a second-rounder, but they need to do something more than what they have, because it's simply not good enough. Like, yeah, these guys only get their name called a couple times a game, but they never step up. They're like the worst in the league in stepping up when it comes to efficiency. You only need to make 1 or 2 plays a game, and they just can't do it. I really hope Zach Ertz signs with the Eagles. He still is not signed with the team. I think they need him badly for this playoff run. I think he's the perfect guy for what this team needs right now. They need tough, good route running, tough grabs over the middle of the field, which the Eagles are just not involved in that area of the field right now at all. They need to be more present in the middle. Zach Ertz, I think, checks all those boxes at tight end. You can get all these other young kids out of there. They're just not good enough right now. They need to do something. I don't know, like a Curtis Samuel is a free agent next year. Go get me somebody like that, or draft a receiver again in the 4th round. They have some work to do this offseason, but that's something they should not completely ignore. And there's not a quick fix this year. I think that could be Zach Ertz. Next year, though, I do want to see them invest something in free agency or in the draft at tight end and or at wide receiver. Again, you're going to have to pay DeVonta Smith. You're paying A.J. Brown and Dallas Goedert. It's going to be difficult, but they got to do something. They got to do something more than what they have. Quez Watkins is not a solution anymore. He should be cut. Olamide Zaccheaus, he's okay. not nearly consistent enough from what I thought they were getting coming from Atlanta. Julio Jones is completely shot, and these tight ends just can't play. So they need more. And because they're not getting it from DeAndre Swift in the passing game. And again, the run game's been good sometimes. It was better this week, but it's been way too up and down. So you've needed those other role players more. I'm not saying, again, it's a deal breaker for this year or for the coming seasons, but I think it's something they need to look at, because seeing all these numbers pass around on Eagles Twitter today regarding these players, it's abysmal. It's really bad. We'll see if the Eagles can turn things around. Eagles Giants Monday, Christmas Day, a big one as they try to get to 11-4. Gino and Patricia Trena from Locked On Giants will dive deeper into the matchup tomorrow on Crossover Thursday. Locked On Eagles, Locked On Giants. Until then, we're going to sign off. Thanks so much for making Locked On Eagles your first listen each and every day. As always, thank you for downloading. Thank you for watching and listening. And let's go Birds. Have a good day, everybody.